Some of my favorite things are motorcycles, electronics, and music. Well, let's talk about motorcycles. All kinds of motorcycles, big ones, little ones, metrics, standards, dirt bikes, tours, street bikes, mini bikes. I've been riding motorcycles, mini bikes, and other random homemade machines all of my life. My friend Scooter Davis and I have restored a bunch of old Hondas. It's what we grew up with. Everything from Z50s to 70s street bikes and Goldwings. We would find them, restore them, and then take out across the country every other year or so. Usually, Scooter on his '89 Goldwing and me on the latest restoration project. A breakdown here and there was just part of the trip. I lost my friend Scooter about midway through this very project in June of 2016. As for that '89 Goldwing I mentioned earlier, well, it's enjoying a much-deserved, pampered retirement at my house. The project was discovered by my dad in a pole barn behind a motorcycle shop in Central City, Kentucky. After finding the owner and making good on some back taxes, we had ownership of this 1981 Honda GL1100 Goldwing. I remember Scooter putting the bike in high gear, then laying down in the leaves and grabbing the back wheel to see if the engine would turn at all. It did. This was 1999. Remember, the sky was going to fall at midnight on New Year's Eve. We were doing our first complete frame-up restoration on a Honda Goldwing. This is the first of 2 restorations I have performed on this very motorcycle. The frame and its parts were all sandblasted, primed, and then painted Centauri pitch black. I had the head reworked, rebuilt the starter, replaced the stator, replaced the clutch, rebuilt the carbs, and added as much chrome as possible to that engine. That includes having the rear engine cover chrome plated. I never did like those chrome rear frame covers the aftermarket companies made for the 1100s. Another project for this bike was the trunk. We shaved off the handle and added a custom spoiler that we made from a spoiler off a car we found in a junkyard. I received a lot of questions about that spoiler everywhere we went. We painted the bike GM Torch Red and GM Indigo Blue Metallic. It turned out good and it was reliable as well. I can't remember it ever leaving me stranded. Now, it didn't like the high altitudes of the Colorado Rockies, but it puttered through all the same. This wing traveled a lot of the U.S., New Mexico, the Smoky Mountains, Utah, Colorado, and all up and down the East Coast. There are more states that it has seen than it hasn't. Then it was 2003. That was the beginning of some serious health issues for me. The Goldwing sat in a carport, uncovered for 3 or 4 years. Finally, around the end of 2010, my health had improved substantially. A year or so later, we were moving to Florida. That is when the bike was moved to a basement where it sat until 2015. These years of the elements and plain old neglect had left this bike in just as bad, or in some cases, worse condition than when it was first discovered in that pole barn. So, the re-resurrection project begins here when the bike was hauled from Kentucky to where I had moved in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. This was a day or two after Christmas 2015. A week or two later, I moved the bike to a friend's garage a few miles down the road. We were remodeling our home in Fort Walton, and while a small shed was in the plans, it was not yet a reality. That stuff in the trunk, that's a CB radio that I rigged to work with a handlebar controller from a GL1100 with the push-to-talk button. Also an AM/FM radio. There was also an extra battery. Now, my only advantage this time was that I had had this bike apart before, but it had been a long time. I knew the history of the bike, so the plan was to build this bike and for my wife and I to keep it. When it came time for sandblasting and painting the frame and all of the frame parts, I hauled all of the pieces back home as not to make a mess in my friend's gated community garage. My backyard became my shop. For 2 or 3 weeks, the frame and all of its parts were sandblasted and then painted gloss black. My wife was not a fan of what I was doing with the backyard throughout this part of the process. She kept humming this song. I like that song. After taking the wire wheel to all of the nuts, bolts, and pieces parts, I stripped the engine down and painted the engine case and all of its parts gunmetal metallic. Once all of the painting was complete, everything was then hauled back to my friends Coop and Lauren's garage to start putting this old girl back together. In this video, it might appear as though I removed these carburetors, went through them, cleaned them, rebuilt them, put them back together, and all was good. It took about 3 tries and some help, but eventually all was good. About the time I had this bike rolling under its own power, my 10x20 shed was being delivered back at home. Here's a little trick I learned while doing this project. That's using aluminum foil to remove surface rust from chrome. It's cheap. Most everyone has some laying around the house, and it works. So, Troy with Auto Body Supply recommended that I use a good sealer before I applied any color. The spike was originally root beer. I then primed and sprayed torch red back in 2000, and now I have sanded, prepped, and primed again, so putting a layer between all of that and this new color. Now, all of the time I am prepping these body parts for paint, my wife and I are searching everywhere we can for the perfect color. Remember, the plan was to keep this motorcycle, so we wanted it to be a color we both liked and enjoyed and thought would stay current for a while. So, now the parts are all ready, and I have spent time on the web and car lots and everywhere else I could think of for the color and graphic ideas. We finally landed on a GM Blue that goes by several names depending on which branch of General Motors is using it. The can we ended up with said Sonic Blue. Oh, and a special thanks to Troy McGee at Auto Body Supply in Greenville, Kentucky for setting me up with everything, including the knowledge, everything I needed to make this motorcycle paint job one of the best backyard paint jobs I have ever seen. It took a little digging and some research, but I did finally find a replacement LED brake light for the spoiler I had made some 15 years ago. Turns out that spoiler was actually made for a Honda Prelude. About this time, I was still getting everything inside the shed organized, so much of the assembly work on this bike happened in the carport. The fairing skirts both had broken tabs where they fasten at the bottom, as is very common with the GL1100 Goldwing fairings. So I ordered two with good tabs off eBay. I then whittled away at my old ones till they would lie nicely on the back side of the replacement skirts. I then fiberglassed the old skirts to the back side of the new skirts, and I hope this will add enough strength to keep these fender skirt tabs from breaking off in the future. I then had to paint my modified fairing skirts and the front fender, which I had already painted blue once, but it was caught by a breeze and blown into the sand and the leaves about 2 minutes into the drying process. It was a wet blue mess. Now, by this time, the bike, or Lucy, as her name has been for years, was doing pretty good and looking pretty good. I was still working out a few bugs when I stumbled upon another bike that I have wanted for as long as I've owned this one. It was a Valkyrie Interstate. So even though we had planned to keep this bike, the Valkyrie was my dream bike. That being said, we decided to sell the Goldwing. The cool ending to this story is the new owner. When a bike of any kind is 35 plus years old, it will need a little attention and a wrench once in a while. So I was hopeful to find a buyer that understood the bike, and knew how to provide the TLC that this bike would need once in a while.
Headed to her new home. She does good.
So, this is what she looks like now, after a year or two at her new home. He has only made her better, and some of the improvements you can't even see. And there it is, the life story so far of one 1981 Honda GL1100 Goldwing Interstate. I hope you enjoyed the video. Look for links below to videos of other projects, and thanks for watching.